Good evening, welcome back and welcome. We're so glad to have you here for this third 3 out of 4 Summer Nights presentations. Many of you recognize the speaker this evening because not only is he occasionally filled in for Father Richard here, but he's also been in attendance at a number of our Summer Nights specials in the last few years. So it's a joy to have him here as a speaker tonight, and I will let him open us with prayer and all of that. But Father Joseph Arsenault is a canon lawyer. He heads the tribunal at the Archdiocese, and I will let him tell you what all that means. But I want to tell you that the best surprise I ever had about how much the church loves us in all of the different things that she does and the ways she sets up was canon law. I was so surprised and amazed about how good God is to us through the church in this particular thing. And so I'm really thrilled that he's going to be able to share with us tonight a little bit about what canon law is and just really how amazing it is for us as Catholics. So, without further ado, please welcome Father Joseph Arsenault.
Well, let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glorious St. Raymond of Penafort, wise and holy patron, come to the aid of those entrusted to your care, and all who flee to your protection. Intercede for us in our need, and help us through your prayers, example, and teaching to proclaim the truth of the gospel to all we meet. And when we have reached the fullness of our years, we beseech you to guide us home to heaven, to live in peace with you, our Mother Mary, and our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You may wonder why I chose to seek the intercession of St. Raymond of Penafort, but you may deduce rather quickly that it's probably because St. Raymond of Penafort is the patron of canon lawyers. And you would be correct if you came to that conclusion. St. Raymond is indeed our patron, and I always seek his intercession as I begin work in canon law. So this evening, we want to talk about canon law and why we should love it. And I'm sure when you hear the notion of canon law in general, it's not something that we tend to love. We may respect it. We may think it helpful. We may think it a hindrance. We may have all kinds of thoughts around it. But love is not something that is a natural expression when we think of law. As I began to think, how I would present this evening, I must admit, I began to think about a TV show that I used to watch occasionally. It wasn't one that watched it every week, but occasionally I'd tune in and see what was going on. It was one of these little sitcoms called Big Bang Theory. And by the chuckles, I could tell it's familiar to some of you as well. And you will remember the wonderful character of Sheldon and his roommate, Leonard. And it was revealed through the course of this show that Sheldon, before Leonard could move in, had to sign a contract. And Sheldon, when he wrote that contract, left nothing forgotten. He covered everything that could ever possibly happen with two people living together. He thought of everything. And he had the do's and the don'ts all lined up. And they lived by the contract. Whenever we have a community, whenever we have a grouping of people that come together for one reason or another, in order for there to be peace and harmony, there needs to be an understanding of how we're going to do this. Could rhyme off example after example. For the most part, we've all lived with someone at some point in our lives. We know how important it is to know what to do and what not to do, how the other person's going to react. And we kind of, in a loose way, we don't get like Sheldon and draw up these contracts, but we have rules that we live by, even in our families. In that experience that we have in our lives, it should come as no great surprise to us that that's the reality in the church as well. In the early church, after the time of the death and resurrection of Jesus, as they began to come together to build the community, they realized that they needed to set down rules so that they knew what to expect, they knew what to do, they knew when they could do it. And that was born out of their lived experience. It wasn't, they sat down and said, okay, let's think of everything and let's see how we can do this. But it was they gathered together. And perhaps in the celebration, use a kind of crazy example in one sense, 20 people there. At one particular moment, one person stood up, 4 knelt, and the rest sat. They kind of looked around and said, oh, we all kind of should be doing the same thing at the same time. And so they talked about it and decided what they were going to do. And so laws began to develop. And because the church was in a time of persecution, different regulations, different laws came into existence in different sections of the church. Because there wasn't a lot of communication amongst themselves. So they expressed things differently. But they all had their rules from their lived experience. And it wasn't until Constantine granted tolerance to the church that various groupings of the church could come together. And it was at this time that various bishops began to meet. And of course, one of the things that they met to discuss was doctrine. What do we believe and why do we believe it? What is it that has been passed on to us? But as they began those discussions, they also realized that there were some very practical things that they had to make decisions on. And again, laws came into existence out of the lived experience, out of the doctrine, out of the customs that had been created. And sometimes they didn't know, kind of because of the persecution that had existed. You know, they weren't sure. Things had changed. They wanted to go back. What was it like in the early church? So they looked to the New Testament. They looked to the fathers of the church and to their writings to see what were the customs, and the laws were developed. But there was never one little book as we have today. They were all over the place. And it wasn't until 1140, a monk by the name of John Gratian decided that there was a need to bring together all of these laws from all the various places. And he created this great work that was referred to as the Gratian Decrees. And it was a tremendous help to the life of the church to have these laws to help us to know what was happening, what we should be doing, why we should be doing it. And as time went on, things had to change, things had to be referred to, and so on. And so Raymond of Pennafort, who we invoked at the beginning, when he came along, he was a Spaniard. He kind of did an update, if you will, to Gratian's Decrees. He did more work on that and pulling it together. But it wasn't until, wrap your mind around this one, it wasn't until 1917, that the first Code of Canon Law was written. From 1140 to 1917, it was Gratian's Decrees. And then all the other places where you would find particular laws. Sometimes very different, sometimes contradictory to one another. And so there was this desire, because the world, in a sense, was getting smaller, it was easy to communicate. There was this desire to say, okay, let's come together under a universal law. The Holy Father of the day decreed the formulation of the Code of Canon Law as a universal law for the Church. In 1959, Pope St. John the 23rd decreed, January the 25th, 1959, he announced the revision of the Code of Canon Law. And it wasn't promulgated until 1983. So they spent many, many years pulling together this work that we have today, the law of the Church. And it is a great resource for us, a great instrument for us. And even since '83, there have been changes, amendments, some sections taken out, others put in, some expanded upon. And in fact, at present moment, one of the books on the Sanctions of the Church is in the process of being revised, and we're just waiting for the new, what we call Book 6, to be promulgated. In fact, if this virus hadn't happened, we probably would have had it promulgated by now. And again, this is what happens out of the lived experience. But yet, we still have that tendency to think of it as something that's not great, something that is a nuisance, something that hinders us. Sometimes we're grateful for it. We think it helps. But it's important to look at it, to see what is in it. What is this 2,000 years of thought and reflection, this 2,000 years of lived experience? What is the fruit that has been born out of it? And so what I'd like to do with that kind of history background is to look specifically at some of the canons that we have in the code to kind of give us an overview. And, you know, the first thing that always gives us a clue about what something is about is the table of contents. And we see in the table of contents for the code that it starts out with what's called general norms. So the general principles that guides this whole book, this whole corpus of the law. And the first canon, very specific, and tells us the canons of this code concern only the Latin Church. So, if I happens to be a Ukrainian Catholic, this book of laws is not about me. It doesn't apply to me in a strict sense. There is another code that deals with the Eastern churches. This one only deals with the Latin Church. And so there are many other laws in that first section that kind of give the overarching principles for the code. And then from that, from those general principles, it's, well, who makes up the Latin Church? So, the second book, the people of God. We focus in on the people of God. And then, how do we organize the people of God? So we go into the hierarchical constitution of the church, to the particular groupings of the church, to religious life, apostolic societies. And then, in Book 3, now we know who we are. What do? The teaching office of the church. We're about spreading the faith, teaching the faith. Then, Book 4, the sanctifying office of the church, dealing with the sacraments, those things that bring us closer to God. Then, 5, the temporal goods of the church. We have things. How do we deal with that? Book 6, sanctions of the church. We don't always play nice. And we have to deal with that, you know? And then Book 7 is processes. How do we deal with all of these things that we need to deal with? So that's kind of the general overview. But as I said, the first section after the general norms is the people of God. So what does the code say about the people of God? Canon 204, the first canon in that section, says this: Christ's faithful are those who, since they are incorporated into Christ through baptism, are constituted the people of God. For this reason, they participate in their own way in the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ. They are called, each according to his or her particular condition, to exercise the mission which God entrusted to the church to fulfill in the world. Second paragraph. This church, established and ordered in this world as a society, subsists in the Catholic Church, governed by the successor of Peter and the bishops in communion with him. That says a lot. Christ's faithful are those who are incorporated into the body of Christ through baptism. They're incorporated into his body through the sacrament of baptism. It's the door in. It's necessary to be part of this family. And as a member, I participate in the priestly, prophetic, and kingly office of Christ. I'm part of the mission. I'm called through my baptism to this great ministry, each according to their own particular condition. Which God entrusted to the church to fulfill in the world. I live in the world. I'm to fulfill this mission in the world. I have to be engaged. Paragraph 2. This church, the people of God, of God of the church, established and ordered as a society, subsists in the Catholic Church, governed by Peter and the bishops in communion with him. There's richness there. We could spend the entire time tonight just on that one canon. But you say, well, wait now. Where's the do's and the don'ts in that? There were none, were there? There were no do's and don'ts. There was simply a definition, if you will, of who we are. Canon 208, flowing from their rebirth in Christ, there is a genuine equality of dignity and action among all of Christ's faithful. Because of this equality, they all contribute, each according to his or her own condition and office, to the building up of the body of Christ. So again, we have an equality and a dignity as members of Christ's family. And we have the call for the building up of the church, the body of Christ. Christ's faithful are bound to preserve their communion with the church at all times, even in their external actions. Oh, now we're finally getting somewhere. See, from 204 to 209, it's all theology. It's all an explanation of who we are. And then in 209, you say, okay, this is who you are. Now this is what you got to do if this is who you are. And we have to, at all times, preserve communion with the church. Not always easy. And today, we see a lot of division, a lot of controversy. See, unfortunately, a lot of people wanting to do their own thing. And as we look, we say, where's the communion with the body of Christ? Where's the communion with the church? At all times, we are bound to preserve communion with the church. As we look at these various realities of who we are, then we come to the particular element. How do we come together? And we hear in 5:15, a parish is a certain community of Christ's faithful, stably established, with a particular church, whose pastoral care under the authority of the diocesan bishop is entrusted to a parish priest as its proper pastor. So as the people of God, as the church, we come together. We come together as a community. And we all know from our own experiences, our parishes are important to us. They're important to us because it's where we experience the faith. It's where we experience our life, our nurture. And it is a portion of the people of God. And then, as the parish, what are we about? In 747, it is the obligation and inherent right of the church, independent of any human authority, to preach the gospel to all peoples, using for this purpose even its own means of social communication. For it is to the church that Christ the Lord entrusted the deposit of faith, so that by the assistance of the Holy Spirit, it might consciously guard, reveal truth, more intimately penetrate it, and faithfully proclaim and expound it. So as the community, we are to proclaim this faith and to use social communications. What we're doing tonight. Not everyone can be here. So we're providing it through social media. This time of the virus, when we had, for the safety of the people, to close down churches for a time. Live streamed Mass, not the same. But it's what we could do to keep the faith. You know, I'm reminded, for a number of years, I would help out in mission territory in Canada for Easter time. And I would go to these very remote areas to celebrate the Easter sacraments for them, Easter liturgies. And you know you're going to a remote place when you get on this plane and the person who let you on is actually not only the steward, but also the co-pilot. And he looks at you all after he's closed the door and he said, "So, where's everyone going tonight?" And everyone started yelling out, "St. Augustine, blah, blah, blah." And they started running off this thing. And I looked at the person across from me, one of the 8 of us that were on the plane. It could only hold 10. I said, "Why is he doing that? Is he being funny or what?" He said, "No, he needs to know where to land the plane." He said, "If there's no one going to St. Augustine tonight, he's not going to land in St. Augustine tonight. He needs to know where he's going." You know you're in a remote area, right? And this community of faith, there was only, they only saw a priest 2 times a year, Christmas and Easter. That was it. And so we had Holy Thursday, we had Good Friday, we had Easter Sunday, Holy Saturday, Easter Sunday, and in the midst of that, we also had to have a penance service to hear confession, because the next time they were going to see a priest for confession was Christmas. The last time they had seen a priest for confession was Christmas. We also had to have first communions, because the next time they were going to see a priest was Christmas. So we had to get all this stuff in. And I was flying out on Easter Monday morning. 2 sisters, nuns, who were there taking care of the community. I said to them, "I'm going to say Mass Monday morning before I leave, because they won't have a chance once I start traveling." I said, "You know, you're welcome. You know, what would be a good time for us to celebrate?" One of the sisters said, "Well, why don't I call around and see if some of the people want to come?" And I said, "Well, you can. Yes, you're fine." I said, "They've been in church since Wednesday. You know, they're not going to want to come again." She said, "Oh, let me call." I said, "Go for it. But don't be disappointed." You know? I had a full church. The whole community came out. And as I was reading the people as they were leaving, I said, "Wow, how come you're here again?" Because we're not going to see a priest again for Mass until Christmas. We want as much as possible to come together for the celebration of the Eucharist. They got it. It really meant something to them. The gospel had been preached to this community that was deprived of a priest. The faith was very much alive. It was a perfect life. The faith was very much alive. And they gathered every week to pray, say the rosary, have liturgies, communion. They understood this. So that's a parish. I think we'll go to, for time's sake, 10:55, because we have a lot here and in our communities that their way of living out faith, their call, if you will, their vocation, is to marriage. And so 10:55 says, the marriage covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of their whole life, and which of its own very nature is ordered to the well-being of the spouses and to the procreation and upbringing of children, has been baptized, has, between the baptized, been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. We all think that we have a real grasp on what marriage is. We may be quick to say that. But do we really see it in its fullness? Perhaps we live it. We don't even know. We're experiencing it. It's a covenant. Two people are brought together in covenant. A man and a woman. Between themselves, a partnership of the whole of life. It's not just something that's temporary. It's for the whole of life. And which of its own very nature is ordered first to the well-being of the spouses. I have to care for the other person. So if I'm married, I have to make the effort to remember the birthday, the anniversary. I have to make the effort. Yeah, you know, I really want to do this, but it's not her thing. Well, you know, maybe this time I'll let it go for her. I have to be concerned about the other, as the other has to be concerned about me. It's a two-way street. To the procreation and the upbringing of children. Be open to life. Want it. If I'm not, it's not a marriage. If I lose one of these elements, I'm missing something. And the richness that is there. The richness. When we do all these things, as the baptized, the Lord himself raises it to the dignity of a sacrament. The Lord blesses this union and gives it a great dignity. Powerful. Okay? We have to think first, too, when it says what the definition is, the theology, before we can see the do's and the don'ts. But the do's and the don'ts are born out of the theology. And that's why in every section of the code, it starts with theology. It doesn't start with the do's and don'ts. The very last canon of the code, 1752. It goes on with a little bit of what it's dealing with before. But the last sentence of the entire code says this: always observing canonical equality, and keeping in mind the salvation of souls, which in the church must always be the supreme law. The whole reason for the Code of Canon Law is my salvation, is your salvation. The whole reason this is brought about. And that's why we always start with theology. And then go from there to the do's and the don'ts. It's about my salvation. Now, as I again told that little story about Sheldon Leonard, I want to come to a conclusion with a little story. When I was first ordained, besides being an associate pastor, actually I was administrator of a couple of parishes at this point, I was also asked to take on the chaplaincy for the local police department, which I was rather excited about and rather enjoyed. And, you know, in all of the experiences that I had during my time as a police chaplain, I learned one very important and crucial piece of information. In Canada, in this area, the main highways, the speed limit was 100 kilometers an hour. The police set their radars at 119. Pardon me, 120. So that meant I could go 119 and get away with it. It's oftentimes how we look to the law. How far can I get? How far can I stretch it? What can I get away with without getting caught? And as we've seen, as we heard in that last little bit, the Code of Canon Law, the supreme law is my salvation. It's all about my salvation. And so if my attitude is, how can I get around it? How can I push it? How far can I get? I'm missing the boat. I'm missing the boat. Because in all, everything is to bring me to salvation. So as I embrace it, as I live it, I find salvation. The reason, in my opinion, that we should love the law of the church, the reason we should love canon law, is that very reason. It's an expression of our faith to lead us to salvation. Not always easy, sometimes difficult. But as we look to it, knowing that in following it, observing it, we will find salvation, we can and will come to love it. Thank you. promised I would be available for questions. So if there are any questions, please feel free. And I will do my best to repeat the question before I attempt to answer it. Yes?
How can a Catholic be outside of the law of the church? And then what happens if we are?
That's an excellent question. The question was, how can a Catholic be outside the law of the church? And if you find yourself outside, what do you do about it? That close enough? Close enough. One of the sections that I was going to touch on, which I didn't get to touch on, thank you, was the sanctions in the church. And the sanctions in the church, so I'm kind of answering the second part first. The sanctions in the church are always medicinal. They are never meant to be punitive. It may seem that way, but it's always meant to bring someone to healing. So if someone is excommunicated, if someone is separated from the church because they've done something drastic, the reason for separating them is to show them the gravity of what they've done, so they can come to conversion and seek to come back. And they can always come back. Finding ourselves at odds with the law of the church is easy. We all have the regulations. For example, I have vowed to live a celibate lifestyle. If I decide, I'm going to go out and get myself married. First, I have to do it outside the church, because I can't do it inside the church as a celibate man, vowed man. But now I'm at odds with the church. I'm at odds with the law of the church. And I find myself outside. So it is in knowing the law that lets us know whether or not we're in the right place, if you will. But if we find ourselves outside, there's always a way back. It may take some humility, it may take a lot of prayer, it's certainly going to take conversion, but there's always a way back. Always. Is that? You're welcome. Yes?
I had a question about Holy Communion.
So a question about communion?
Yes. I see in the news, some churches says that no, we're not going to allow you to have communion on the tongue. I see other churches giving out the communion in baggies. But I'm sure the canon law is pretty strict on that. How does that occur?
Right. So the question is, you see a lot these days about, because of the virus, various areas dealing with it differently when it comes time to communion. You've seen no communion on the tongue in certain dioceses. You've seen communion in little baggies. You kind of pick it up on your way out. And all kinds of other things. And where does that fall in the law of the church? Certainly, there are laws regarding the way that communion is to be distributed and all that. That's very clear. And there are certain things that are happening that just should not be happening. And, as we very quickly hear about them happening, we don't so much hear about them being stopped. And that's certainly happening. People are being told, no, we understand why you're trying to do this, but it's not right. And again, in going to this section, when you start reading the theology and even going to the theology of the church, when you start unfolding that, you realize, yeah, right, this just doesn't make any sense. I was trying to do good, but this just doesn't make any sense. And so, there's certainly regulations. But there's also in this, there's great debate with the law in some of these areas, and particularly with communion on the tongue, because there is a code that says that the rights of the church, the rights of the individuals of the church, for the common good, can be denied them. So there's no question that every Catholic has the right to receive on the tongue. There's no question about that. But under the present circumstances, with what we know about the virus, is it better for the common good that this not happen at this time? There's great debate. I'm not proposing to have any answer to that. I think there is tremendous debate right now. And I think, one of the other realities that we have in the church is we always have someone we can go to say, what does this mean? How do we do this? Are we doing right? They're denying me my right. Do they have the right to do this? And I know that right now, before the Holy See, the question is being proposed. They haven't answered on it yet, but I'm sure something will come down. And, we'll see how they unfold that. But it will be, again, it's not a quick answer, because they have to look and they have to think, is this really for the common good? Is this not for the common good? What is it? Some of them are easy. The host in a baggie, picking up on your way out to church, that's clear. We don't have to do any research on that one. No, you can't do that. So again, it depends. But it's always, we go back to what do we believe and why do we believe it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes?
Could you just mention a little bit about how a canon lawyer is trained and prepared for the role?
So, how a canon lawyer is trained and? Prepared. Okay. Basically, you go to school. That's the short answer. There's various schools throughout the world where canon law is taught. I myself did my degree in canon law in Belgium. I graduated in 2000. So I've been at this for 20 years. It was, at that time, it was a 2-year program that I had to go through in Belgium. It is now a 3-year program that someone who wants to study canon law to get their licentiate in canon law must go through. And then after you get the degree, there's continual study, continual updating. You have to go to conferences and various meetings, because there's always this need to study and to search the faith, because it all comes from the faith. And how is the faith expressed? How is it lived? Well, this is the way we've always done it. Yeah, but, okay, things have changed a little bit. Maybe we need to do it this way. It's still the same thing. We're still responding to it in the same way. And that takes a lot of thought, a lot of discussion. And so really, the best way that one can prepare to function as a canon lawyer is to consult and to talk to other canon lawyers and to continually research and to keep up on the various periodicals and documents that are coming out. You know, as I said, I read to you about the parish. Well, just this past week, the Holy Father came out, or the congregation, one of the congregations in the Vatican, came out with a whole document on parish. And not so much new laws, but how those laws that exist there are expressed, are lived in the present context, with the shortages of priests and all that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of stuff, and a lot of consulting, and a lot of, you know, some bishops that I've worked with, I won't name any names, but some have said, you know, you get 3 canon lawyers in a room and you get 4 canonical opinions. You know, and there is some truth to that. You know, there is, because canon law, you know, we think of canon law on the law system that we have, which is a common law system, which is based on precedents. But canon law is based on a Roman law system. And so it's a different system of law, and it's a different way. You argue out the point. So if your argument is logical and you come to a conclusion, then that's the conclusion. But if I argue it out and I come to a slightly different conclusion, well, that's acceptable too. Because it's argued out logically. It's not just one way. And that's hard for us in North America, because it's not the way we think of law. That's other, yes?
When Pope Francis came out and saying that he wanted to make the annulment process much simpler for people to go through, did that change the code in any way to speed things up?
Yes, it did. The question was, when Pope Francis changed the laws regarding the annulment process, did that speed things up? And did it change the code? And it did. This one here that I have with me tonight was printed before that. And so, and I didn't put an insert in this one. So there are some canons in here that are not correct with dealing with annulments, because they've been changed. Some have been taken away, others have been added. And it has sped up the process somewhat. I would say that in that regard, for the most part, kind of in the general world, if you will, the process has been shortened across the board. But for some places, the process, because of lack of personnel and other reasons, was extremely long. In our particular archdiocese here, and in most dioceses where I have worked, a normal case before the change could take usually around a year and a half to process. Taking out one of the steps, the last step that was in the old process, if you will, the review of that second instance, which could take up to 6 months. Now our cases are running about a year, sometimes even less than that, depending on various factors. But in some places, an annulment could take 3 to 4 years. And so with this change, it's really sped things up for them. They might be able to get it in a year and a half now, instead of 4 years. So in some areas, some of the laws have really been helpful. For us, we've been pretty good. So it hasn't made a lot of changes for us. There's a couple specific cases. There is, he introduced one way of doing it before the bishop, where the bishop has to write the sentence and do the decree. But the facts have to be so clear in it that it really doesn't have to be argued. The facts just speak for themselves. You know, one of the prime examples would be, you know, I'm from Canada, and I got married to an American. I got my green card, and I divorced the American. I wasn't looking for marriage, I was looking for a green card. And that's, the facts are right there. The day I got the green card is the day I started the divorce. So, you know, it's so clear that it's easy to do. You know, when you start getting into other stuff, not so clear, it really has to be argued out. So there are some avenues where things can be sped up quite a bit. Because in the previous law, that case, where even though it was so clear, could still take a year and a half to process. Now, you might get it done in a month and a half. Yes?
Can an annulment be granted if they don't have the other party, both parties?
Involved?
Yes.
So the question is, can an annulment be granted without both parties being involved? And the answer is yes. Both parties do not have to be involved. Both parties, however, have the right to be involved. So if I'm married, my marriage is falling apart, I want to start the process for an annulment, my former spouse, my ex-wife, has to be notified. Now, I say has to be notified. I was divorced 20 years ago. I'm now living in the States. She was in Canada. I don't know where she's at. Her parents are dead. I have no way of tracking her down. She's probably remarried. I have no idea what her name would be. So I try as best I can to find where she may be, but I'm just not able to do that. Once we've proven that we've done everything that we can to try to locate her, then we can proceed. The person is declared unlocatable and we go forward. If you do know where they are, they must be contacted. Yes. And given the opportunity, most times, you know, especially if it's been a long time ago, we don't even hear back from them. And then they're just declared absent from the process. But sometimes they do. And sometimes, you know, it's been my experience. I had one case when I was on the appellate court in Canada, that we had a case come in and they said that they couldn't find the respondent. And through some of the facts of the case, we thought, it shouldn't be that hard to track this person down. This was quite notable, you know. And we did one search, and there was a phone number and an address for the person. We contacted, and it was a very weak case, and we thought we were probably going to have to overturn it. We were able to contact the respondent. They cooperated and actually gave us the information that we needed, and we were able to give an affirmative decision in the end. But without their cooperation, we never would have been able to do that. And so sometimes when we think that, you know, for whatever reason, you know, we don't want the other person involved, sometimes it's to our benefit to have them involved, you know. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there are very difficult situations, and it's very difficult, and you know, but we try our best to ensure, you know, like especially if we're dealing with a situation where the ex-spouse has been violent or something of that nature, we can ensure that they do not know anything about the whereabouts of the petition. You know, so we can do things like that to help them out. But the party has the right to be involved, but they do not have to be. And if we can't find them, we have to move forward. Because the person who's petitioned has the right to know. And so we have to be able to do what we can for them. But, yes?
We have a lot of Catholic politicians who support killing babies in the womb, like they go 3,000 a day now. What's the Canon law saying about that?
So the question is, we have politicians who, Catholic politicians who support abortion, who support abortion. What's Canon law say about that? Well, quite frankly, whether you're a politician or not and you support abortion, it's a no-no. Canon law is very clear. We are life. Life is sacred, and we cannot take life. So, you know, certainly, so that's one thing. So, are they in error? Yes. So that's one element. I think you're probably, and I shouldn't even open the can of worms, but you're probably leading to that Catholic politician coming up for communion. What's it say about that? There's great controversy over that, but Canon 915 is pretty clear that someone who is in clear rejection, if you will, against the law of the church, and who is in manifest sin, clear manifest sin, is to be denied the sacrament. The debate becomes, well, yeah, okay, you know that that's what they voted for, but how do you know they didn't go to confession before they came up for communion? And that's where, you know, some bishops, some priests will say, nope, you voted, unless you make a clear statement of a retraction, don't even come. And there's others, they may have gone to confession. I can't make them reveal if they've gone to confession or not, so, you know, I'm not going to publicly deny them. So there's great debate there. But the law is clear. Someone who's in manifest sin is to be denied the sacrament. Yes?
If during the process of annulment, Canon lawyer is presented with information by one of the participants that would lead them to believe that a crime has been committed, or probably committed in the process, is that something that the Canon lawyer is either morally, ethically, or legally obligated to report to the appropriate criminal authorities?
So the question, if I heard it correctly, in the process of an annulment, through some of the testimony that is presented, there is evidence that a crime or proposed crime has taken place. Are the judges and of the case bound to present that to civil authorities? Is that encapsulated?
I'm really looking at more of a criminal rather than civil.
Yeah, well, that's what I said, that they're bound to reveal it to the civil authorities.
Yes.
Yeah, so, but the case is started as an annulment.
Yes.
Yes. So, you would have to look to the civil law and to see the obligation of the civil law. So, for example, one that's on our minds, we hear of a case, we have a case, and there was sexual abuse towards the person, one of the spouses. Or one of the spouses, why the marriage broke down was because the other spouse committed sexual abuse against a minor. Oftentimes, when it comes to my desk, it's already been dealt with in the civil world, or it's being dealt with in the civil world at that moment. I've never had a case where it hasn't been dealt with. But, having said that, with the laws, if I received a case and it was clear that nothing had been done, I would be bound under Kansas law to report it. So I would have to report what I discovered in the law, in the case. Is that... I think we've gone way over time. But it's been a delight. If there are other questions, I'll be happy to answer them as we're going out with our masks on. You'll get to see mine finally. But it's been a real delight to be with you. I hope my time with you has given you a new perspective for the law of the church, and hopefully even a little desire to study it, to open it up, to see more closely what it's all about, so that we can grow in our faith and our expression of it, and so that together we can journey to the kingdom. Thank you, and God bless.